everybody. This is the third part of the Wargaming Statistics and Probability series. It's the final part of the Wargaming Statistics and Probability series. And this will carry on in my future videos where we deal with basically analyzing battle reports to kind of go over what happened. So this is something that I've really wanted to see be a part of the overall, battle report world. Looking and watching battle reports is one thing, but being able to talk about them and analyze them and kind of go over why things happened the way they did, I feel is very important, because just watching what happens during a game doesn't really tell you or help people understand why things happened the way they were. So with this, I'd like to go over my reports and just analyze them a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about how you would have done things differently. All right. So we know in this battle, if you've watched the battle, and the link is in the YouTube link below, that the Spires end up winning 8-6, and this was a version of scenario 2. So we have a scenario an objective in the back and 2 objectives out in the enemy line that you can claim. Now there are 4 objectives total, but you can only claim 1 in your own. So something to kind of talk a little bit about before I talk about the tail of the tape here is that when you have a game like this, it's important to note that as long as things are even in the match, meaning both players have the same number of points, either player can be aggressive or defensive. The moment that a player scores 1 point over from an objective than the other player has to be aggressive in this scenario, because he'll never catch up in points otherwise, because you get 2 points for capturing an enemy's objective and you only get 1 for your own. So the moment someone goes up by a point, you have to get across the board and get that 2-point objective. So that's something to keep in mind. Now the tail of the tape, what's that? Here we're going to look at the 2 rosters, and having applied the math that we talked about in episodes 1 and 2, we get a look at the baseline tangible mathematical score of both of these lists. Now, as I've gone over extensively in those other videos, and just to remind again here, the baseline scores do not indicate a 100% chance of probability win for either side. It doesn't even indicate what the score will look like. It's really just a matter of looking at what the difficulty level is and who's got the upper hand in terms of just the math. So if we look here, we see that the Spires have a 220 point output compared to the 100 Kingdoms, which has 181 point output. So very clearly in this case, the Spires do have the upper hand in Army List in terms of its base mathematical abilities. I've also denoted the King and Queen units. These are the 2 pivotal units in either side that if you can find a way to remove, your chances of winning are going to be a lot easier. Doing the math here, we see that this game will feel like a 1,250 point game versus a 1,512 point game. So it's going to be moderately challenging for the 100 Kingdoms player. It's not impossible by any means, but it's going to be moderately challenging. I'd also like to point out that in every single war game, this is what happens. When you're playing or you're building an army list in any game, what you're trying to do is trying to make that whatever the points value that you are given operate at a much higher level than what you've been given. So in any game, one side will always have a mathematical advantage over the other. The severity will always be, it'll depend on, both people are tuning their lists, and then the difference will be minor. If one player is tuning their list and the other's not, the difference is going to be a lot more severe. You'll see versions of this popping up in discussions online everywhere. So how this applies to the 3 pillars of wargaming that I talked about. 3 things make up the outcome of a game. The Army List is one of those. In this case, the Spires have the advantage. The second one and the third one are determined during the game. And during the game, the second one we have is luck of the dice. We all know that the dice can go bad, but overall what I like to do is I like to collect all of the dice rolled during the game and kind of get a measure of how they operate overall. Because a lot of times people will complain and blame the whole game being lost on the dice, and a lot of times that's just really not true. So if you can get a whole look at the entire game, you'll see, well, maybe the dice didn't roll bad overall, but that one time you needed them to roll well, they failed. But I will say this: if your whole battle plan depends on a certain dice roll going off and succeeding for you to win, then there's probably some things you can do on the player skill side to improve on that. Now here we see in this game the Spires have 49.51 to the 100 Kingdoms 42.12. And I listed a normal range as between 40 and 60 percentiles. Now how I come to those numbers, it's really easy. It's a little bit tedious and you have to be good at keeping score. But you calculate for every dice that's thrown, for every set of dice that's thrown, you get the expected value, you get the actual value, and you record its deviation. And actually, you really just need to record its expected and its actual, and you can go over and do the deviation later. So I keep a tally of all these things during a game, a lot of it in my head, just because I've been doing it forever, but I'll keep them on paper as well. And I just give an example with the spreadsheet here, how that comes out. And so like in the example here on the spreadsheet, this has no relation to the game at all. It's just showing you how these numbers came out. If I had 3 sets of dice that I roll, you see the first one I had 10 dice. I expected a 5, so like a clash value of 3, a 50-50 shot, and I rolled an 8. Well, that's really good, and my deviation's +3 in that case because I rolled 3 extras than I should have. Where then I have 8 dice and I expected 4, and I only get 3, so that's kind of slightly below average. It's -1. Or I have 14 dice and I expect a 6, and I roll 5, so that's also slightly below average. I got -1. So overall, 32 dice are rolled, and the overall deviation was 1. So out of all those dice, 32 dice, I rolled 1 more success than I should have rolled. That comes out to be a 53.125 percentile. So that's, that's very almost in the middle. In most games that you play, both players are going to fall within the 40 to 60 range. So in this case, both Scott and myself rolled below average. Scott less so. He pretty much was almost right in the middle. And my dice, well, they rolled a 42, so they were a little bit below that. But both of those scores are in the normal range, so you can't really blame dice in this case. So we'll just give the Spires had a moderate advantage in the dice, but again, that's nothing that will break the game. So we know that Army List went to Spire and dice went to Spire. So that means that in the game, the 100 Kingdoms has to play flawlessly. They have to play flawlessly, and the other player has to make some mistakes for this to be a victory for the 100 Kingdoms. So some intangibles, these are things you can't measure with math. Range superiority, big one. I'll talk about this one a lot. Range superiority is simply one side has the ability to do damage from a farther distance greater than the other player. And if a player has range superiority, oftentimes what that means is the other player has to be more aggressive and they have to get across the board and deal with those missile units, because if they stand still, they're going to take a lot of damage. That's not always the case. So I can think of some examples like classic Warhammer. Dwarves had really high armor, so they would castle a lot in the corner, and they could take your range superiority, and often they had the range superiority anyway with all their war machines. However, just because you have range superiority does not necessarily mean the other player has to come forward. It depends on the defense and it depends on the player. Another intangible was healing. Both sides have the ability to raise dead models back up, so that was equal. And then last, the Executor's Supremacy ability. This thing is probably the most powerful supremacy ability in the game, or if not the most powerful, one of the most powerful. It lets the Spires player activate 3 units in a row without the 100 Kingdoms being able to respond. So it kind of makes the game more of a classic I go, you go turn situation. It's only 3 units, but that's huge. So those are the intangibles that come into play in this game. All right, so here we had a battle layout of how the units ended up lining up. This kind of breaks everything down in terms of showing you the numbers. The first number being the offense, the second number being the defense, and how they were laid out. Now, obviously, not everything comes out during the game, but overall, this is what the spread looks like. So you see the Spires outnumber the 100 Kingdoms in unit count. The Spires also had a greater defensive capability, so they had the ability to hold objectives better than the 100 Kingdoms do based off of their math. The 100 Kingdoms do have offensive superiority in this game, but only because of the Steel Legion. If you remove the Steel Legion, which was the 100 Kingdoms King unit, the 100 Kingdoms really have very little offense as well. So overall, this 100 Kingdoms list has a lot of work that needs done on it. 1 unit of crossbowmen, I think, is not a good choice. 1 unit of crossbowmen does not really do anything. If you're going to take crossbows, you need to take at least 2 units so they can work together. And you can see here, this is a heavy, from the 100 Kingdoms perspective, it's a heavy right flank, which means the heaviest unit, the Steel Legion, sitting on the front. And that'll pretty much protect the right front, from anything on the enemy side. But the left side is guarded by knights and men-at-arms, which, if we add together, we can see that's about even with the Abomination and the Marksman. The key difference here is the Marksmen have a 28-inch range, so they can start pelting the knights and the men-at-arms, and plus the Abomination has a 10-inch move, so he's got maneuverability over there as well. So that left side is a weak point. And then in the middle, we have 3 units of force-grown drones, whereas the 100 Kingdoms only have a men-at-arms and crossbow unit. Given that the force-grown drones have a low offensive capability, you can see they have a 14 and thereabouts if you add all of their offense together, and the men-at-arms and crossbows can actually take that and dish out enough damage to hurt that center line. This would actually could go either way in terms of the center. So overall, I would say it's pretty evenly matched up, other than this left side. This was anyone's game. Some alternate deployments, you could have put the Steel Legion across from the Marksmen and forced the Marksmen to start dealing with them, but that would have left the Brute drones to have free reign over the right side, and you got to kind of match up to what your opponent's doing as well. And if you give them a flank like that, that can be deadly. So analyzing the game, we're going to look at some blunders. In chess, if you're a student of chess, when you're learning the game, a lot of teachers will make you record, and a lot of the good players will do this anyway. They record their entire game on paper, and then they analyze their game for blunders, because those blunders are learning moments that they can use. They use to learn how to not do those things again. Player skill is huge, and in this case, the 100 Kingdoms have to have a flawless game. And I, being the 100 Kingdoms player, will tell you I had far from a flawless game. I made a lot of stupid mistakes, and those stupid mistakes are why the score was the way it was at the end, and why I ended up losing that game. The first blunder was the biggest blunder in the entire game, and that was failing to cap those objectives in the beginning. I lost 2 points. I gave 2 points up because I could have grabbed either of those objectives, and I was so, I don't know, focused on that hill and getting the hill that I didn't pay attention to the objectives. And that ended up probably costing me the game, because I lost by 2 points. But if you know, it came down to a 7-6 at the very final turn. And had I had those 2 points, I would have won that. I would have already won that game. There would not have been a 7th turn. So that was a major blunder. And the moral of that story is pay attention to your objectives at all times, because I failed to do it on that. And that was a pretty rookie mistake. Second 100 Kingdoms blunder. I let my cavalry be charged by infantry. In this case, the Spires had pushed their infantry forward, and it came down to an initiative, really. Spires won the initiative, and they were able to get the force-grown drones into my knights. So it did 2 things. Number 1, it ended up removing one of the knights from the damage they took. And number 2, it stalled them. They couldn't even move. So I couldn't deal with those marksmen, because I was back there dealing with chafe units. So that was a blunder on my part. It was a moderate blunder. The Spires weren't without their own mistakes or their own things that they could have done better. Here they had pushed a unit of force-grown drones up to my crossbows, exposing their entire flank to the men-at-arms. And in this case, this is a chafe unit, so losing them is not as painful, but still it's a waste of a resource. It's a waste of a pressure point. This unit was able to be easily flanked and destroyed. So that was a minor mistake on the Spire's part. Blunder 2. This one was a moderate blunder. This one could have actually cost them. Had the knights not been held back like they had been, this could have been a game changer as well. It ended up not being one, other than a black eye just to lose your Abomination the way they did. But they let the Abomination be charged by infantry. Falls in the same category as letting my cavalry be charged by infantry. The Abomination moved way too close to the men-at-arms. He did not need to. He's got a 10-inch range, which gives him an effective 16-inch charge, or 20-inch just double march move. He doesn't need to be that close to an infantry unit, because he can charge them and they can't even get close to him. So the Abomination moved forward, got way too close to the men-at-arms, got charged, Yes, the men-at-arms paid dearly for that, but the knights were able to finish the abomination off. Another issue, it is kind of a blunder, but it didn't matter in this game anyway because the Spires won. But the executor ability was never actually used. This could have been because it was forgotten. It could also have been more of a gamesmanship thing where my opponent felt he was going to win anyway. He didn't need to push the advantage by popping this because it would have ended the game a lot sooner and it would have been a boring game to watch. I don't know either way. I think either way is valid. That comes down to like if you're playing casual game and not tournament games. Sometimes you don't need to go as hard as you can. But if you're just watching from a pure gaming spectacle, the executor never popped his supremacy ability, which could have ended the game a lot sooner. 100K Blunder 3. In this case, I had not stacked my deck in a good way. And because of that, I let my infantry unit get flanked by the forest-grown drones, which was a waste of a unit. That ended up really hurting my middle. So pay attention to how you stack your deck. There's a lot of skill involved in knowing how to activate your units and in what order you need to activate those units. Keystone moment of the game. At this point, it was 7-6, and I needed a lot of luck in this case. The Steel Legion was going to have to charge the brute drones, and it was going to have to overwhelm the brute drones to the point where they were able to cap that objective. And what Spires chose not to do was they chose to hang back instead of be aggressive. He didn't need to be aggressive at that point because he pretty much had the game won at that one. So you don't always have to be aggressive, and you don't always have to throw units into combat if you don't need to. And by him holding back the way he did here, I had to charge across that river, which put me at a disadvantage. So keep that in mind. Play the objectives. You don't always have to be on the aggressive. Sometimes it's okay to play defensively and pull back if it's gonna play to your advantage better. I see a lot of games where people are really aggressive and they go after their opponent all the time, and they end up getting pulled out of position because they're chasing after things they shouldn't be. And this is why I'm highlighting this moment here. It's not always required. So if we look back at the 3 pillars of wargaming, clearly the Spires also played a better game. So it is no surprise that with a better army list, slightly better dice, and better playing on the table, that they won the game. So some takeaways. 100 Kingdoms couldn't afford mistakes because their army list was weaker. They needed some luck, which they didn't get. Despite those things, there were still opportunities for the 100 Kingdoms to win. They actually were winning. We were winning for a turn or two, and then things just went the other way. So it wasn't a blowout by any means. Just because your army list is weaker in this case doesn't mean you can't still pull out a victory. That's important, instead of just saying, well, his list was stronger than mine, that's why I lost, or the dice just screwed me, that's why I lost. And you can see there's a lot of things that come into a game other than those. And while those things definitely play a part, and it's not fair and it's unreasonable to say, now army list has nothing to do with it, you just played bad, keep in mind, the game is a mixture of those 3 things going on. So it is valid to say that, yeah, the army lists one was weaker than the other, and that played a part, because it did. It's also unfair to say, well, that's why I lost, was because of the army list. That's where it becomes unreasonable, because there is some responsibility you have to take for your own skill. And I know some people don't like to do that, or they feel that makes them weaker or whatever. But you got to take responsibility for your misplays as well, and chalk that up as part of the reason why you lost. So some answers. That list that I played is definitely not. I don't find that to be a really strong list. It needs tuned. Part of the challenge is, of course, we don't really have a lot of stronger units released right now, so we kind of have to make do with what we got. But crossbow units in pairs instead of ones would definitely be something I will change with that list. It just needs tweaked a little bit. That probably means I'm going to lose some units because I'm going to have to condense a little bit, but in the end, if I can get that output score just a little bit higher, that'll help. Plus we have militia now, which weren't released at the time that battle report was done. So having some light units push up, especially the militia bowmen, which while they don't really do a lot of damage, they're very effective in their efficiency and what they can hold and what they can contest, I should say, not hold. And they do give you some lucky shots every now and then. So